And we are now live.
For those of you that would like to do the Pledge of Allegiance, please go ahead.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It is 7:02 p.m. Welcome to a regular meeting of the Silverton Board of Trustees on July 26th. I call this meeting to order. Kelly, roll call, please.
Trustee Barella.
Here.
Trustee Harper.
Here.
Trustee Wager.
Here.
Trustee Beerma.
Here.
Trustee George. Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Here.
Mayor Furman.
Here. This evening, do we have any revisions to the agenda?
We do. We have another revision to the agenda upon your consent. I'd like to make an amendment to our agenda to include a brief overview and update from San Miguel Power Association on the upcoming road closures for the fire mitigations that are scheduled starting August 9th. Jeremy Fox or Alex or Terry will be here to explain the closures. And I would like to put this right after our proclamation.
Any objections? Nope. Great. Any other revisions?
That's all.
Okay, awesome. Any revisions from the board? Great. All right, at this time, we will open up this meeting to public comment. Comments must be limited to 3 minutes. We'll start with in-person comments and then move to virtual comments. Is there anyone in the audience tonight that wishes to make public comment? All right, moving to virtual comments. Please click the raise hand button if you're watching on Zoom and introduce yourself. Looks like no public comment at the beginning of the meeting this evening. We will have another public comment period at the end if anybody feels remorse for not saying something now. So at this time, we'll close the public comment period and move on to the next item on our agenda, which is presentations and proclamations. And the first item is a proclamation recognizing Kimmett Holland for his years of service with the Silverton ambulance. And I note that Kimmett is not here this evening, has a conflict with the meeting. So my recommendation is that we, if we want to, adopt this proclamation, but then do the formal reading of the proclamation at the next meeting when Kimmett can be present. Perfect. Any discussion or questions?
I had one. I was curious where it was, but it said the years of service that he actually had with the town and the ambulance association.
That was a good catch.
We just wrote years of service.
Okay.
We can specify his hire date and reflect that in the final version. I believe that would be on the first page, so if the trustees wanted to sign the second page, we could just make that change on the first page when we present it to Kimmett. I also noticed a minor typo where emergency services should be capitalized, so we can probably move forward with this, but make those two changes.
Great.
So do I hear a motion to approve the proclamation subject to the provisions of adding the total years of service that Kimmett served, as well as fixing the typo that Todd caught? So moved.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Barella.
Yes.
Trustee Harper.
Yes.
Trustee Wager.
Yes.
Trustee Beerma.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. Awesome. All right, and now to our added agenda item, the overview update from San Miguel Power.
And I would like to introduce you all to Jeremy Fox, who is the manager of engineering for San Miguel Power Association. And he's here to explain closures and answer any questions.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. Appreciate you guys having us here tonight. Thank Gloria for allowing us to present real quick to you on our Red Mountain Electrical Reliability Project and our broadband improvement project. I realize this past week was an eye-opener to several different events that happened, and I'd like to go through a brief presentation regarding the purpose and need and what the project entails, and then take some question and answers if that's okay with the group.
Yes, please.
I'm going to try to share my screen here in one moment. I apologize. I'm trying to find the correct screen. Just one second. Here we go. Now, are you folks seeing that screen?
We are.
Very good. So our Red Mountain Electrical Reliability and Broadband Improvement Project. This project scope carries from this northern section of Ouray, and this line goes through Ouray all the way over Red Mountain, over the Idorado substation to the Burrowbridge substation. The Burrowbridge substation is located just where Ophir Pass enters onto US Highway 550 for reference for most of the folks on this call.
Still doesn't work. Here to them.
1 second, we're just adjusting the screen so that our in-person audience can see as well.
Okay.
Would you guys like to move your seats forward so you can see?
Could I interrupt just a minute?
Sure.
Move the podium out of the way so Gloria can see the screen. And
I'm okay. I've seen this presentation.
okay, then, well, I don't guess I need to see it, but I really can't.
Sorry, just another minute.
There you go. Excellent, thanks.
We'll figure out this.
All right, thank you, everybody. You're welcome to go ahead now.
Technology is great in some ways, and in other ways it's very challenging, so thank you. So this is a map, and I apologize for the scale, but this is from Ouray North all the way across Red Mountain Pass down to Burrowbridge substation, which is right, as I said, where Ophir Pass hits US 550. The purpose and need of this project, quite frankly, is for electrical reliability, to continue to serve as a backup source of power to our San Miguel Power customers located in the communities of Ridgeway and Ouray. This is the end of life rebuild for this line. It's been there for quite some time, and I'll get into some of the details in just a few moments. It's also for fiber communications. As part of this project, we are carrying on a middle mile fiber communication from Ouray all the way to the Burrowbridge substation. Now, this is about a 16-mile section of new fiber that will be available to help close the gap. It doesn't go all the way to Silverton, but it does close quite a bit of the gap that we've all been excited about. So what we're looking at here on these pictures is something that came to pass a couple of years ago. This is the line from Montrose into Ouray. This is our basic feed, normal feed into Ouray. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Enchanted Mesa, just beside the Ridgeway State Park, had a mudslide there several years ago. When that happened, as you can see from the photos, it started to damage the line. Now, this line is owned and operated by our wholesale power provider, Tri-State. And when this happened, they had to do quite a bit of damage repair. When that happened, when that line was being repaired and temporarily moved into a new location, we were fully dependent on the existing line that goes over Red Mountain. Ironically, during the time that we were on the line coming from our Red Mountain line, when we immediately switched back over to our normal feed from Montrose, the Red Mountain line was lost within 2 minutes of switching over. Now, our customers never saw the outage, never knew it was almost there, but that was a highly avoided problem that brought this project up into the limelight. As we know, the Red Mountain Pass has its own obstacles, right? We have rockfall, avalanche. fire issues, etc. And in 2020, the SMPA Board of Directors set several strategic objectives. And one that is very much worth mentioning is the reliability and resiliency objective. This was to identify and prioritize reliability and resiliency risk and issues. And that initial focus will be on fire mitigation. We've all heard about the fires in the West and the wildfire issues that utilities are facing. There were sub-objectives that the board put together. They want to continue the development and execution of a complete wildfire mitigation plan and a system hardening plan, identify any external threats, inventory current vulnerabilities, assessment costs, and those timeframes, as well as determine relevant stakeholders and outreach groups and resource sharing with other cooperatives across the state, U.S. Forest Services, and government entities such as yourself. And the reason why this is important is one of the initiatives behind the strategic objective is to complete the vegetation management piece and the fire mitigation work for this project, what's going on right now. Now, why would we do this project, right? We looked at all these different alternatives. Tri-State performed some alternatives analysis for us. We looked at new substations up near Kelowna with a new transmission line back down into Ridgway and Uray. We also looked at a 25-mile transmission line from Montrose substation all the way back into Uray and Ridgway. And of course, we examined some other alternatives, such as emergency battery backup for the town of Uray, both battery and diesel generation backup. And of course, rebuilding the transmission line between Borough Bridge and Uray. Now, all these look like alternatives. Alternative A and B were exponentially more expensive than the other alternatives. C and D with the battery backups just didn't provide enough backup for the timeframes that we needed. Therefore, we went with alternative E, which is to rebuild the line between Borough Bridge and Uray. The project background, this line was originally built, or the Western Colorado Power Company back in 1928. It was originally a 25 kV, and then it was upgraded to 44 back in the 40s. The earliest found special permit we could find was back to Western Colorado Power back in 45. We received a special use permit, now the San Miguel Power did, and back in 1978. At the time, those permits were a little unclear if it covered the entire line or just portions on the Uncompahgre National Forest, but that covered about a 5-mile section of federal lands and was a 75-foot right-of-way. The portion of Red Mountain Pass to Borough Bridge was re-permitted back in 05. There was a rebuild done in the Chattanooga area back then, and they moved the lines slightly, and that was covered under a new permit. This transmission line is 16.2 miles long. There's about 7.5 miles on GMUG, 3.2 miles on the San Juan, and there's other private lands in between. The right-of-way is, like I said, 75-foot wide. The overhead section of the rebuild, the construction piece, there's 50 to 80-foot tall structures. There's going to be a combination of single pole structures, H-frame structures, guide wood pole structures, and of course, there's going to be steel structures as well in areas where the helicopter access is the only way to get there, and there's no room for guying. Here's a couple of pictures of what the new structures would look like. On the left is the old structure, a single pole structure. On the right there, you see the new structure composites there. This is the 2-pole structures, the larger pole structures. On the left, again, is what the existing looks like in some of the best locations. And over on the right is what a new pole structure would look like as well. Now back to the project elements. Project element number 4 is the disturbance and clearing for overhead. Full 75-foot right-of-way cleared of trees with exceptions where the terrain may be a valley. So we're not trimming those trees that are way below the new conductor. And we're also removing hazard trees that are even outside the right-of-way. Now with this piece of the project that we're currently in at the moment, we had to do a complete timber sale contract with the U.S. Forest Service. And that was part of our existing permit requirements. And as you all know, that terrain, there are many trees that are up high that could still strike the line. So we're being vigilant to make sure we can get all those hazard trees out of the way, as well as the trees that are in the right of way now. Another project element is the underground section. We're considering, and our board has approved to move forward with a design to underground a piece below the Ruby walls. This is about a 7/10 of a mile section that will require a 3-foot deep and 2.5-foot wide trench. That will require vaults every 1,000 to 2,000 feet. And right now it's expected to be in the northbound lane in the shoulder of Highway 550. Now, this is another huge hurdle in this project, and we're working with CDOT engineers on the design. And also we'll be talking more about the partial closures and the closures that will be required for this. One of the advantages of rebuilding the project as well is with technology, right? We can eliminate some structures. They'll typically be 10 and 20 foot taller. However, there's going to be 44 less poles on that line when this is rebuilt. So that's 176 proposed compared to the 220 existing. Here's a brief overview of the underground section that's being proposed. On the bottom right of this picture is County Road 18, which is the access road up to Engineer Pass. The underground would follow the road. It's not exactly the way this line shows, but basically follows the road for 7/10 of a mile. There's a section just past the wall where we can get back up to the existing overhead. And this is basically due to the amount of extreme rockfall damage we have in that section and the cost to maintain that when that happens. There's going to be construction yards. The Idorado mine has been excellent in working with us on providing areas that we can use for laydown yards. Helicopter work. We'll have a fly yards near that stone building on the north end of Ironton Park, amongst other areas, depending on the locations. There's going to be several substation upgrades. There are the Idorado substation, which is located right near the Idorado mine, was going to be removed and replaced with newer pole-mounted equipment. We also have an existing pole-mounted Red Mountain substation, which provides power to the CDOT snow shed that will be removed and replaced with similar equipment as well. And last but not least, there's a switch that will be installed outside the Ouray City sub, which will allow us to bypass an aging and congested substation there in the city of Ouray. We also went through a full environmental assessment for the permitting on this project. And if you'll notice on the right, this was all done back in 19 and 20, pre-COVID. We fully expected for that to roll through. We didn't expect the pandemic to hit, and it did. Now we were down in the bottom right green box, issuing of the permit for the construction. Received word last week that the final signatures are being taken place, and we should have that in the next few weeks. With the NEPA analysis, there was a full analysis done by ERO Resources. I won't go through all these today, but of course, all of the plants and wetlands, wildlife resources, wildfire risk, hydrology, et cetera, all went into the permitting analysis. And with the NEPA outreach itself for the construction, that also went to coordinating agencies and future public scoping as the project comes to fruition on the construction side. And of course, tribal consultation was part of that as well. We recognize community concerns, and that's part of the reason why we're here tonight. First of all, of course, road closures and trail closures. So the road closures, and I'll get into this briefly here in just a moment, a little more. Dates of the closures will obviously occur in 21 for the fire mitigation work and the vegetation clearing. There are further closures and partial closures that will be necessary during the construction process and the timeline. And you'll see in parentheses there, these details to be determined for 2022 to 2025. We have approached this project with the hope and dream of completing this in one season. Given some of the responses we have gotten this week, we're reevaluating that. So we may split this up into different seasons or do different things. And we're here for feedback and get buy-in from our stakeholders. We'll conduct the underground section in the spring or the fall, whichever works out best for minimizing the economic impacts for Ouray and Silverton once the construction schedule is established. Now, that piece, the underground section, we're not sure yet what kind of road closure partial road closure will actually be in the mix. There's been some comments this week, and we will talk through that and have further conversations with all of you as those come to fruition. Trail closures, the U.S. Forest Service helps determine those. We have some of them closed now. It really hasn't seemed to be a big problem, but we've tried to get that information and ahead of that, and they're marked on site as well. For our local member outreach and the considerations, we have an informational website. We were really trying to push folks to that website. There's maps there, impact study, purpose and need, environmental and cultural info, and links to CDOT. There's also a small video there just explaining the project. If you scroll on down there on the right, it's kind of a screenshot of it. We have more information on road closures and phases of the project, design changes, etc. And we fully intend to, improve this page as data is available. And we want to, all of our outputs are going to drive information to this one source for the most updated information. And with that, that kind of concludes my quick overview of the project need and purpose. I do want to say before I lose the floor here that, we sincerely apologize for the way the communication happened on the road closure scope changes. That was never our intent. We received the information when we did, and we pushed it out as fast as we could. There are several different factors involved with the decision-making process to where and when we could do those. We did reach out to a stakeholder group, as many of you were probably part of, and had 2 different meetings on changes in schedule and resource availability and taking input from everyone. And we appreciate your participation and giving us feedback. With that, I will take questions.
Jeremy, do you mind if I tag just something at the end there?
Go ahead, Alex.
I'm Alex Shelley, Communications at San Miguel Power. Jeremy mentioned the stakeholders groups and the meetings that we've had. And I just want to put in that we are planning on having regular contact with that stakeholders group and maintaining communications from here on out. So just wanted to make that known as well.
A quick question. I'm reading here that this was posed to town council in February 18 of 2020. So URA had kind of a bit more of a heads up about what was coming down the line in comparison as a board than we have. Their city council heard about it in February of 18. Is there a reason that we just didn't quite get the same updates on this side of the hill, or?
I believe it was probably March 11th and 12th that we made a presentation to the San Juan Board of Commissioners, and I believe it was this Board of Trustees or a stakeholder group there, which happened to be, that was the day before the COVID acts dropped. But we did make that presentation to a group there in Silverton back in 2020.
But not to the town council? That's what I'm asking.
I believe COVID stopped that one. We may not have gotten to the town council at that point.
Thank you.
What kind of input from us would be most helpful?
Well, to be frank with you, we're asking for your support. This project is vital to the electric reliability of frankly, all of Uray County and parts of San Miguel County. One of the biggest pieces of this project that, not only benefits that part of our membership is the broadband option that we're bringing. This does close a large gap of fiber redundancy in the future that could be done for the town of Silverton. We've also had discussions with, your Region 9 representatives, et cetera, on, the possibility of looking at helping to make those communications to get the broadband and the fiber connection on into Silverton. We don't own that section of line. That's actually Tri-State's line from Borough Bridge into Silverton. But we're definitely open to helping open those communication lines and try to help get things moving for you.
Jeremy, I'd like to add a few comments on that regarding that question of how we can receive your support. I'm Wiley Freeman, Manager of Member Services at San Miguel Power. Part of our goal here with this project, and we've got work scheduled for August and September of this year, but a huge part of this project is in subsequent years, as Jeremy has gone over, which I think gives us pretty good amount of time to work with stakeholders. But the goal here is to make data-driven decisions. And so I think what we're finding is that through the stakeholder group, through you guys representing your communities, that's a data input source that will help us make better decisions for coordinating this project. I think it's an understatement to say that the coordinating, the logistics of carrying out one of the largest projects SMPA has had to embark on is profound. And part of helping us coordinate that is your input. So you're going to see frequent and regular communications from SMPA about this project, not only throughout the rest of this construction season in 2021, but going forward. So we really, really appreciate your attention and your input as we develop and put timelines and solidify those details of this project going forward. So definitely appreciate your energy and response and support to helping us coordinate those.
Were you about to say something? Oh, Molly?
I don't think anybody is against in any way, shape, or form what needs to be done, created, and upgraded for all counties that are involved in all of this. I think the major issue was the lack of communication and or the feedback or just coming to the communities and asking about the time frame of the road closures. I think that's where most of the breakdown with these communities is where it's happening, because it was kind of just a blindside. Obviously, I just read that letter from Uray, and so it does hurt a lot of our, our local businesses and so on that were just not aware that any of this was happening. So we appreciate the project. We know that it is vital. And I don't know if any of you remember, my father, Jerry Hoffer, sat on San Miguel for quite some time as well, prior to our local representative, Terry Rhodes. So I do understand the value of everything that is being created, but we do just need extremely better communication here going forward. So that way we can have individuals and or businesses plan for these road closures. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. I want to acknowledge your comments about the communication. You have 3 of us from SMPA on this call tonight to back that up. And all of us will vouch that the channels of communication at SMPA about this project and the details and working with the stakeholders is going to be much better as we embark on the work going forward. So just really want to acknowledge that comment and thank you for addressing that. You are right. That is one of the cruxes of why we're at where we're at today with lack of communication previously.
Thank you for that acknowledgement.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening and for that presentation. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry, was there anything you'd like to add?
I was just gonna ask you guys, are you fine with the new schedule? It's starting on August 9th. I've heard from a lot of people that isn't gonna work. And so I thought I was coming here tonight to find out what the town really wanted.
Well, to be honest, we all know that it gets slower after the kids go back to school in the middle of August. So that is a better time frame. First week of August is tough. But I mean, I guess, is this soon? I mean, enough advance notice for businesses that rely on this is really the issue, rely on that road. You know, is there a right answer? No. Does the project need to move forward? Yes. Is the time frame a little off? But I mean, look at our weather recently. What are you going to do? We've got flash flooding almost every single day with all the monsoons that have come in. It hasn't rained like this since, I don't know, early 90s.
That's probably gonna affect
Yeah.
all in the trees.
It's going to affect us a lot. So the inclement weather. So what is the right answer for every party involved? I don't think there is one. I think communication moving forward is far more important about how and when. This schedule obviously is a little late, but it's here. I mean, I don't know what else we can do. So.
I'm here to help every way I can. I mean, I work with these guys all the time, and San Miguel wants to get along with everybody.
Yeah.
It was a big kick in the butt when we got it this last time. So I think if you guys want to try and make the schedule different or anything like that, it needs to be said now before anything else happens.
So a question I have is, I saw the note about emergency services having a possible way through during the closures, but I'm curious if there's been coordination with the other services that support town, like UPS and FedEx and Cisco and Shamrock, and if those services are being cut off from the north as well, or if there's a plan to accommodate their ability to still make regular stops in Silverton.
I can take that one. We're having a meeting Thursday with emergency management personnel to talk about emergency pass-throughs, and that would be emergency vehicles and those type of things. I'm not sure if that would include delivery trucks. I'm not a traffic engineer. I don't know the law and detail on that, but I would think that it's mostly just emergency personnel or emergency vehicles or search and rescue type folks during the times that the road is closed. Of course, it will be open during the open times to let people through.
So I guess a request that I have, and I'm not sure who it should be directed to, is reaching out to, contacts at all of those different delivery services and finding out if they have a plan to work around the schedule, or if they just plan to stop their route for the period of the work, so that we can have a real sense of what the impact is.
I think that's an excellent question to bring to the table. We can immediately work on consulting with CDOT on how that is handled in their experience. I think we might find some insight there. So thank you for bringing that up. That'll be our immediate response to the questions that you raised. Next step to that, I think, would be directly your point, which is to reach out to those organizations that you listed directly and see what we can learn from them.
And I'd like to add, once we do that, we can we'll communicate back to you what we find out.
Thank you.
Hey,
Sally?
I'm just jotting those down. I wonder if you rattled those off the top of your head. I wonder if you've still got them and can repeat that list.
Sure, I'm sure there are others, and maybe we can ask for community input if I'm missing any, but the ones I see most often are Shamrock, Cisco. I'm sorry?
That comes from the south?
Those come from the south.
South, Shamrock and Cisco both come from the south.
So those come from the south, maybe not impacted. FedEx, UPS, Postal Service, alcohol distributors. There's a handful. I'm not sure what other services we get.
Yeah, Breakthrough, RNDC, and Southern.
And I'm not ignoring you, sir, but we're supposed to reserve public comment till the end. Thank you. Sally?
Thanks. I just wondered if Terry kind of opened the door. I'm just curious about how, this is a question for you, Terry, like, is it possible to change the date from the 9th and push it back later? Molly sort of alluded to that as that it's not possible, but I'm just kind of hopping into this conversation. I'm obviously out of town and I haven't been part of the whole story, but just for my benefit in the communities, is there room to budge the project date window at all? Or, I mean, do we want to talk about that?
Well, I'm not sure it's Jeremy and all these other guys that got this all together, but I'm saying, I know how much this time of year means to Silverton and Uray. This is our biggest chance for everybody to get their payday kind of during August. And if we could push it past Labor Day, it'd be the best thing that could happen. But I know Jeremy said that they've already had everything scheduled and stuff. I thought maybe there's a chance to swath out the trees and pick these up later or carry them a different way. They're just things that I think we could work on and I'd like to see done if possible.
I guess I could speak to that real quick. One of the hurdles that we have in doing that are the resources that are already put there in place. With the wildfires in the West right now, availability for helicopter work is extremely tight. And that's really what drove a lot of the dates that we were unable to, move very much, unfortunately.
If we continue to have significant afternoon thunderstorms, does that mean that some of these delays might not occur? If the weather's really bad, would you guys pause work and have a system for like a Nixle system for letting us know if the road's open?
Absolutely. Yeah, those are all tentative to weather delays, emergencies, et cetera, as with any, yes, absolutely.
Sally, do you feel like your question was addressed fully?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it sounds like, this is obviously a huge project and has taken tremendous resources and coordination of those resources to get it implemented on the timeline that it is. It sounded like it was worth just explaining either why that needs to remain the way it is or to try and troubleshoot and push it back to a better date on the calendar. And if that was possible, I wanted to advocate for that because obviously the August 9th date is less convenient and it's been shorter notice than if we were to push it back. But if it's really locked in, then, I'm not gonna, I support the project. I really agree with Molly that it's not the project that I don't support or that I would say as a community, we believe in having the redundancy and the strong electric grid, but just the timing and the communication of it's a little rough. But yes, thanks. That answers the question.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else this evening, guys? Well, thank you for taking the time to join us this evening.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Well, just like to say, if something comes up, you want me to read something tomorrow's meeting or anything, email. I'm behind Silverton and Uray right now on the way, so I think this is at a bad time. And I'll explain it to meeting when I can tomorrow. But I appreciate you guys. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
All right, next on our agenda is the housing study presentation by Heidi Hagler. Heidi, thank you for joining us this evening.
Too bad. Thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well and walk through a housing study that's been underway for the town of Silverton. Give me a moment. And Sorry, move to my right. Hopefully, I'm going to do the slideshow and hopefully you'll be able to see that. Great. So can everybody see my screen now?
We can.
Great, wonderful. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this evening. I'm Heidi Agler. I'm from Denver. I'm presenting from Denver, and I'm with a firm called Policy Research. We're a women-owned housing analysis and planning firm, and we have been underway with a housing study, not only for the town of Silverton and San Juan County, but for the entire 5-county region. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the impetus of that study and then focus on findings from the data analysis. We've done an employer survey, and I want to share some of those as well. Comments from stakeholder engagement, and then most of the time I'll spend will be on the consultant recommendations. So a little bit about this study. It's officially a regional housing study. It was funded by the Southwest Colorado Council of Governments and Housing Solutions of the Southwest. It covers Archuleta, Dolores, La Plata, Montezuma, and San Juan counties. There is a segment of the report, so a supplemental housing needs assessment that's focusing on the town of Silverton. I will be talking about that this evening. We are still in the process of finishing up this study. So these are preliminary recommendations and preliminary findings. We've analyzed the results of the employer survey. We've done a lot of interviews, not only with employers in the town of Silverton, but stakeholders throughout the region. And we're in the process of finishing up some of the housing needs projections. Because your communities are so small, it took us a bit of time to get those data just right. So we're still analyzing some of the changes in the market related to purchases over the last year. The primary objectives of the regional study are to provide current data and information, gather perspectives on how housing shortages are affecting business, that's particular to Silverton, and then talk about immediate and long-term housing solutions. So just a little bit about how things have changed. Most of the demographic data that we have go through 2019. The market data that we have been analyzing will go through 2020. But if we look at how your community has changed just in terms of household income, you'll see that you've got a lot more people who are earning more than 100,000 and fewer who are earning less than 75,000. That's compared to 2010. There are a couple of reasons for that. Part of it is your jobs rose quite a bit from 2010. You didn't permit or build a lot of units. And so the result is that you've had people who have left the community are now commuting in for jobs. Some of that decline in households by income and households overall are related to shifts in the type of housing and how it is used. So rental units that were sold by investors or converted to short-term rentals that used to be permanent rentals have made the community harder to afford. When we look particular at the rental landscape, your median rent since 2010 has risen by 78% compared to renter income. So these are people who were able to stay in Silverton or still renters in Silverton. Their incomes rose by 57%. Cost burden, which is defined as paying more than 30% of a gross household income in rent, it actually declined. So if you think back to that shift in household income, people who left the community tended to be lower income renters. Some of them had their incomes go up, but many left because they couldn't afford rent. And so that cost burden goes down. We are seeing the shift in cost burden, overall cost burden decline throughout Colorado as high income renters and owners take the place of lower income renters and owners. So as a result, overall, the number of renters, so these are people who claim Silverton as their permanent residence, declined by 15%. We have data on short-term rental listings, so the number of units that are listed on various websites for short-term rental. In 2018, 39 listings were counted. That has almost tripled as of first quarter 2021 to about an average of 100 listings. We had 15 employers respond to a survey that we did. We also interviewed many of those by phone and over Zoom. We got a lot of rich information from that survey. We asked them the number of jobs that are currently unfilled because of difficulty finding housing. 37 was the total reported unfilled jobs, and those are mostly in your core industries of food and beverage, as well as housekeeping. We asked how many employees had turned over in the last year due to housing shortage, and the average was 40, the total was 40. And then we also asked how many workers have declined employment offers due to lack of housing, and that total was 50. I would also offer, and in the report, we have a lot of solutions that employers put forth and the stakeholders we interviewed put forth. I would say big picture, your business community really feels like there is a very, very critical need for housing. If their employees can't find housing, they camp, they commute. This feels like an acute and very critical need for business owners. And I would say in some cases, people feel like it's reached a crisis level. When we step back and look at the data, I wanted to spend most of the time this evening thinking about solutions. And I know that you have been given a couple of presentations on common solutions that are utilized in states like Colorado. I want to touch on some of those before I go into my recommendations. So one of the things that you can do now, that because of a recent legislative change at the state, is inclusionary zoning. This is a policy where new development is obligated, typically mandated, but sometimes incentivized to provide affordable units as part of when they're building new units. Honestly, this works really well when development volume is high. It can work against development when there's not a lot of offset of market rate units. So we don't see that applied very often in very small communities. Density bonuses, another common solution that a lot of urban areas are exploring right now. This is really thought of making the best use of available land. So if I've got if I'm land constrained, I'm not air constrained. If I go up or I maximize the number of units that I put on a site, I'll get more units, and that increases housing supply, and you can mandate that some of those be affordable. We see this work best in urban environments and in certain segments of like Denver, for example, downtown, where you can get a lot of height. Again, density bonuses are very volume based. So if you're not building a lot of units, it's not a very successful policy. Mostly what we're recommending now when we're looking at land constrained communities or communities that aren't growing very fast or don't have the ability to grow very fast is looking at land, making land available for mixed income housing, 100% affordable housing or land trusts. This is something that's being explored more actively in high cost communities. It's typically very successful. The city of Austin, which I know is kind of a funny comparable, but they're one of our long-term clients, they have had a lot of success with a program that they've utilized over the last couple of years called Unlocking Affordability. And they're allowing, it's a land use proposal, but it's linked to affordability. So they're allowing 6plexes and 8plexes by right if those developments have a certain proportion of affordable units. So it's a program that's heavy on incentives, and that gets to some of the land use constraints that have caused some of their problems. And then last but not least, fees. And so in communities that are not high volume, but feel that they need a trust fund to be able to leverage state grants and federal grants, charging impact fees. So charging developers of new or linkage fees of new, both commercial or residential, a fee to help support development of affordable housing that are occupied by employees rather. And again, these are volume dependent, but it's a more effective way in some communities to produce units than inclusionary zoning. Just, some lessons learned from some of the policies that we've seen not be as successful as they might have wanted to be in other communities. It's really critical to attach a deed restriction to a development that has any type of subsidy in it, or a unit that has any type of subsidy in it. Communities that don't deed restrict those units, that means cap the appreciation on those units that have had a subsidy or initially affordable. They typically lead to a windfall, so a flipping of that unit and that erosion of the subsidy. Some communities are using first right of refusals. This is common in Summit County, for example, which allows workforce or the community, the town or nonprofits, to buy those units, the first opportunity to buy those units before they go to a common buyer who may or may not want to keep those affordable. And then workforce preferences. This allows a workforce, again, the first opportunity to rent available units. So these would all be developments where there's some type of public subsidy in making them happen. When I step back and look at the data that we've analyzed thus far, consider the employer input that we had and other stakeholder inputs, these are my preliminary recommendations. And I put these into two buckets. The first was short-term solutions to address immediate needs for workforce housing, and then long-term solutions. For long-term, I've chosen a five-year time horizon, mostly because it takes a long time to get units developed. Most of these solutions are really responding to some state funding that we're hoping will be available really soon. Another bill that was passed, this is separate from the state bill that I talked about that is allowing inclusionary zoning. This bill is 1271. I believe that the state Department of Local Affairs will be rolling out grant opportunities in the fall. Those will provide for communities like yours who have done a housing study, opportunities to analyze land use and zoning and see how those regulations could change to incentivize more affordable units. If you have taken the steps of doing an analysis and modified some of your land use and zoning, you have the ability to apply for flexible grants to be able to facilitate affordable housing. So thinking ahead to that, I would think hard and take a quick look at your zoning and land use codes and how those may be restricting development. I peeked at those, although it wasn't necessarily part of our scope, and I do feel like your code's a bit traditional, and you could think a little more outside the box in terms of allowing attached housing, the type of housing that we know doesn't appreciate as fast as single family detached homes. If you were to allow like by right development or six plexes and eight plexes, you would want to put some restrictions on those so that those couldn't become vacation rentals or second home rentals to preserve some affordability in those. Most of the employers told us that your problem is so acute that people are camping, there's nowhere for folks to live. You might want to think about creating some type of a temporary housing village. And this is I think a long-term and appropriate long-term response to your surge in summer employment and the new economy in which we live, where short-term rentals have become a very real part of our housing units. And so thinking about how might we create some type of temporary campground for workforce or a tiny home community, which is becoming increasingly popular throughout Colorado to respond to those employment surges. Another strategy that we're seeing, Summit County has tried this, other communities are thinking hard about it, is to looking at incentivizing property owners to rent to long-term tenants and take their units out of a short-term rental status. This is tricky in that short-term rentals return a lot of money right now, and so there is I would say this is it has been successful in Summit. I don't know the volume at which you may find this successful. Summit County has a really interesting program where they've provided incentives in terms of they're helping landlords, particularly smaller landlords, manage that tenant function and that rental function. And I'm happy to connect you with some of the folks there that have, who are now in Gunnison actually, but who developed that program. In terms of, disincentivizing conversion of permanent rental units into short-term rentals or vacant units, some communities have explored a vacancy tax or an empty home tax. Mostly this is used in Vancouver, Canada, and it worked pretty well. The other thing you can consider is applying heavier fees on short-term rentals, and then use those fees to generate leverage state grants for a housing trust fund. And then with that, I'd prepare to make use of town-owned land or properties, thinking ahead to this House Bill 1271. If the town can demonstrate that it's taking action to address housing needs, I think it would put you in a better position to get money from the state to be able to facilitate actual development. The other piece here that we would recommend considering is funding to rehabilitate rental units. So if you got any type of DOLA funding, so thinking ahead again to 1271, thinking about how to incentivize landlords to keep those units in a long-term rental status through providing funds for rehabilitation. We also heard quite a bit from employers that a lot of concerns about housing condition. And so this would get at those concerns and those needs as well. In terms of 5-year solutions, and so thinking ahead to, I think it's clear from the data that you need more affordable housing, you need more housing for workforce, you need permanently affordable housing, so deed restricted units. You'll need funding to leverage unit creation. So I would think very hard about establishing an ongoing source of revenue that could be invested not only in local programs, but also position you to get grants in the future. And then, if I thought about if I could wave a magic wand and make housing happen tomorrow, I would focus on both a summer housing option only available to local workforce. We've seen in urban areas, tiny villages be very successful. I believe Durango has a new one as well. The other thing to look at is, cooperative living and whether or not any of your if you're discouraging cooperative living or repurpose of units into cooperative living on the land use and occupancy end in any way. But I firmly believe that you need some kind of surge capacity and sort of manage around that. In terms of long-term mixed income housing, we think you could do at least 1.5 times an Anvil size development. My understanding was that was about 12 units, and many employers told us that they think maybe that was too few, thinking ahead to where you all are today. So this could be a mixed income housing community. It could be a predominantly deed restricted housing community with occupancy preferences, of course, going to local workforce and a disallowance of short-term rentals. And so with that, that concludes my presentation, and I am happy to take questions about any of the recommendations, the data, or what will be forthcoming in the report.
I've got a bunch of questions, but maybe I'll ask a couple and then we can go around the table and then circle back. Starting with the data on the income slide, I was just curious if you could tell us a little bit about what supported that. It looked like, just from an eyeball perspective, it's not apples to apples. In 2010, there's like 375 respondees, whereas in 2019, there's only about 230. So it makes it look like income across the boards declined, except for over $100,000, which increased by 25 people. So I was just curious to know a little bit more about that. And then also, is that just Silverton, or is that a sampling from multiple places?
Yeah, so the income data would just be Silverton, and those are data from the census and from the American Community Survey. In a community the size of Silverton, there's definitely a huge margin of error, as you all are aware. So when you analyze data in a community like Silverton, you're really looking at direction and consistent direction over time. So I would focus less on the number and more on where trends are leading you in terms of what's happening in the community. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I guess what would be, how would you read that chart in terms of trends?
It's pretty consistent with what we see in high cost communities, which is what we don't know, quite honestly, is of the households. So when you look at like households earning $35,000 and less, is the loss, if you will, of those households because they left the community, or is it because their incomes went up? If I'm making $35,001, I would be thrown into the upper income category and thrown out of that lower income category. So because we don't have a data set that follows people over time, we don't really know what's happened to those individuals and what their situation is. When we pair that with cost burden data, though, and we see big fluctuations in cost burden, that tells us that people are probably leaving because they can't afford units. So when we also disaggregate cost burden by income level, we're seeing more cost burden in middle income categories, which then suggests that the people who are experiencing more cost burden. The people who are leaving because they can't find affordable housing.
Awesome. Yeah, that definitely helps. Thank you. And then the second one was data related also. Were you able to figure out what resulted in our jump from 43 short-term rental listings to 94 from 2019 to 2020? That seems like such a big jump that either there had to have been like a new development or a change in law or policy. And I was curious if it was possible to identify what doubled our rental inventory.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, part of the limitation that we face, or anybody faces when they do housing research, is there's not like a census of housing units. So the housing units, information about housing units is reported by the people who live in them, if that makes sense. Similar to, it's difficult for me to say a particular unit converted from a permanent, it was occupied by an owner. That owner left and then is renting it and now is renting it, and then it became a short-term rental because I can't follow that unit over time. Part of that uptick in listings in that time period is largely related to units being listed on multiple sites. So that could be it's likely listings, not necessarily an infusion of units, some units converting from permanent to short-term rental and others being listed multiple times. So it's really sort of the marketing aspect of those units in your community as well that you're picking up in that data.
Got it. Do we know how many vacation rental permits we have, just so we can kind of compare the data with?
We have 41.
40, so we don't in fact have 94
Correct.
short-term vacation rentals.
Bill McDougall told me today we had 41 vacation rentals.
Okay, so that seems like just a red herring data item based on the where it's being sampled from. So
correct.
Cool. Okay. I'll go into other questions later. Why don't I hand the floor over? Molly?
I just wanted Heidi to actually define for anybody listening, because there was quite a few glitches in our recording. If you can define what you're calling a short-term rental, and I guess if we put that slideshow back on to our permanent, I don't know, website or something, so anybody who missed it during all the glitching can see it. I mean, so I wish that's all I want for you to define what you're considering short-term housing or short-term rentals.
Yep, and I'd be happy to share the slideshow. A short-term rental, we typically define as a unit that is rented for fewer than 30 days.
Thank you.
I can keep going. Does anybody else have questions though? Okay. So I was wondering, so since this is kind of a summary of the draft analysis, I was wondering if the final report will go into a little bit more detail in terms of specific recommendations, like how many units we need. And I saw that at the end, you mentioned the possibility of like 18 more units like the Anvil units, but then also, what is the target rent based on income in Silverton? What's the target sale price based on income in Silverton or transactions that are happening? What's the ideal mix of unit types? Like, do we have more demand for studios or 4 bedrooms with yards or storage sheds? So I guess like just a little more detail in terms of the recommendations based on what you're seeing at a macro level, so that we can really hone in on how to focus our energy on actual developments.
So in terms of the number of units, target rents and target sales price, absolutely. That'll be part of the study. We're doing that we're actually building a model, which we're almost done with, that has a web-based model where you can toggle and see the communities compared against each other, and then switch communities and see their trends. So that data will be part of that model as well. In terms of like unit mix, that's typically done in a more site-specific survey of need. Like if you were applying for tax credits, you would have a market study, a site-specific market study done for that kind of application. We don't go into that level of detail. For a larger study where we're doing a resident survey, we may have more detail on that, but I would say 1 and 2 bedrooms, potentially, studios. At this point, it's sort of whatever you can get on the ground. Most low-income housing tax credit developments tend to be 1 bedroom on average. So we're not seeing a huge demand for larger bedroom sizes outside of urban areas, and even urban areas tend to skew a little bit toward that one bedroom average.
Molly?
So based upon that statement, we are talking typically then about younger people, less family orientated, which is more of the base of our workforce, which as an employer, I can tell you, you're 100% on. It would be smaller 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and studios based on who come to work in this town in the summertime and in the winter too. I mean, because we do have that complete flip-flop of the transient community that half come for the summer, half come for the winter. So site specific. We had talked about looking at some potential fourplexes over in the rest of the Anvil subdivision that the town would possibly help get. And I'm assuming it would be through that House Bill 1271 in order to help facilitate that to move forward. It seems like we don't have enough of what I would consider affordable vacant land, even if the town was going to start land banking right now to help perpetuate units being built. So a lot of this, we have a problem with people wanting to come in and build. There is land, it's not necessarily affordable, but there are places that you could build some really nice, big multiplex or complex units for housing. But we also have a problem getting material here. We have a problem with our workforce. We have a problem with, these are all of these component units that have always made it very difficult. So I have to applaud the county getting done what they did get done, although I would agree it was a short-term fix, which is exactly what we're looking at doing now. And we really need some long-term fixes. I loved all your ideas and thank you for presenting.
Yeah, and I would, we did a study for the state for CHAFA, looking at, it was about 5 years ago, looking at the what was behind the increase of costs. So they were, and this was, before costs were where we're seeing them now, concerned about the per unit cost increasing year over year over year. And we took a look at what the reason was. And it was predominantly labor. Now we see, commodities prices have gone up so much and it's really difficult to get supplies. And so that's exacerbating the problem as well. I think that is, and we did a study in Ridgeway a couple of years ago where, their constraint was you earned a lot more money, you made a lot more money if you built in Telluride. You had an extra hour commute if you're living in Montrose, but your wages were far higher than what you could command in Ridgeway. Those are, those structural issues are really hard for a community of your size to solve. And I feel like this is something that needs to get, it's on the radar, I'm sure, of state legislators, but needs to get solved at an economic level at the state in terms of training programs. I would take a look at, and I didn't look at your building code in any level of detail. I just did a scan of your land use code, but looking at manufactured units and how to make hopefully we're going to see more of that technology embraced statewide, and see more suppliers and being able to respond to that to reduce building costs. So I feel like that's an untapped area that you're starting to see a little bit of movement in, but that potential subsidies or investment, real big, big money behind it could change the game there in terms of development costs.
Beth, did you want to jump in and add any thoughts or context?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Heidi, for presenting today. I just wanted to address a question about, diving into the details about how many units and the cost and all of that. CHAFA does have a technical assistance grant program that's coming up this early fall that we can definitely look into applying for. And that technical assistance would be a deep dive into that type of assessment. So actually knowing what the details of types of units and housing we need in the community. So that's one part as well. And then I also wanted just to recognize that on August 5th, we will be having a Silverton Housing Summit where a lot of the stakeholders for these different programs, and I believe Heidi will be attending virtually, will have the ability to discuss together as a group kind of different means of access, funding, and resources that we can use for our community here.
Thank you. So I have one more complicated question. When we had the state demography presentation last year, they mentioned how we actually have a very healthy trend in terms of the demographic moving here. Our most significant incoming demographic is like the 30 to 40 something with a family. And they contrasted that with places like Breckenridge and Frisco, where their most significant demographic that's incoming is like the 20-something transient seasonal worker. And we undoubtedly need more workforce housing. There is none right now, none available, and it's very, very hard to staff businesses. But I'm curious about making sure we aim for the right amount, because I'm guessing that there are some unintended negative consequences if we use all of our 0.8 square miles of Silverton's remaining available land for workforce housing, and we limit the ability of this healthy, 30 something with a family, long-term resident person from being able to move here. So it would be interesting as this continues to also hear some suggestions on how we balance those things to make sure that we have like healthy, attainable housing as well, and not only workforce housing.
So I would say I'm surprised a little bit by the Summit County data. They're really a gold star in terms of many years ago, they decided that they really wanted to invest in housing and childcare. They make a lot of investments in childcare to ensure that families can stay. And so they've been acquiring land and developing housing that is, in some cases very family focused and others workforce focused for a long time, starting with a development called Wellington. And I think a second phase was Lincoln. I believe it's about 85% deed restricted. It's attached, single family detached homes. And it has childcare that are right on site that they also subsidize. It could be that in Summit's case, they sort of maxed out, that ability to respond to the needs of working families, and are now seeing jobs that may have been occupied by families now being taken by people who are more transient in population. And I wouldn't be surprised if you saw that shift over time. I think it's a very typical high cost community change. May not be desirable, but it's a bit of a reality right now in high cost communities. And I will, so that in the perfect world, what you'd love if you had like the right level of subsidies and the right land is some kind of mix where you have units that are smaller, studio, 1 bedroom, that are targeted to work for workforce, and then 4 plexes, 6 plexes, 8 plexes, more of a townhome style type of development or stacked townhome that can accommodate families as well. It's just a matter of finding the right level of funding and the right developer to be able to do that for you.
Awesome. Sally?
Thanks. Yeah, I had kind of a similar question maybe, but I've been thinking a lot about when we talk about housing, it's such a slippery slope for me to head into housing and employment in a really tight link. And you mentioned that there's some complexity behind thinking about the move from the bracket of the $35,000 worker, either switching brackets or leaving our community because it becomes unaffordable. And I think because the employment in our community is such an issue, and there's really a real lack of year-round employment. And so we have I love what you're calling the seasonal surge. And I just wonder if there's a component or if there's a way to sort of add in the complexity of employment and employment opportunities and how we think about our year-round economy. Because I, as a teacher at school, I've definitely seen families come and go, not necessarily because of, partially because of seasonal work. So they'll stay through the train and then they leave. And then also because of the lack of, for lack of, I don't know, like a more like career work that engages them and holds them in our community. And so for someone looking to stay and live in our community, they need a place to live, but then they also a lot of times need meaningful work that they can do. And so just sort of adding that component into the coming and going and the transience piece, and then thinking about, if we aspire to have year-round residents, then we also are aspiring to have meaningful work for them so that it keeps them employed. And then, so that's more of just like it's not really so much of a question, but it's something that I'd like to learn more about in terms of like when we look at housing, how we interrelate employment. And then this is also not a very specific question and kind of just out there, but I've been considering a lot as we look at housing developments, the way that we mix, and we've been referring to it sort of abstractly here, like mixed of family units based on need in the community. So who lives here and what do they need, or who wants to come live here and what will they need? But I also wanted to add to that consideration the idea of like a socioeconomic mix, because I've been to Wellington in Breckenridge and it's awesome. And I've been to like some of these other communities. I'm traveling right now, and Bozeman's really struggling with this as well, where when these partnerships work together to create housing developments, then the sort of organic natural mixing of residents gets lost. And you have this income group all living together and these seasonal workers all living together. And I just think it really erodes the fabric of a community. And it kind of takes away why we would want to live in a place. And so I just wonder, not only when we think about like, what do we actually need, and we calc that out and we have really good statistics, how we look at the cultural effect of those needs on the fabric of our community.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would say it's something that in small communities, it's it's tough to know what the right answer is. I mean, sort of if I had to choose concentrating affordable housing, and I use that lightly, so placing, just getting, if I had to choose between developing a lot of units and having it concentrated versus, doing more sort of a mixed income, I'd probably skew toward just get the units on the ground as fast as possible and worry less about that concentration. Part of that is because the market's going to make that decision for you more than you can actually get ahead of it or react to it. And that's just the unfortunate condition that we're in right now with housing costs in Colorado. So on the flip side of that, though, you need market rate units to offset the cost of affordable units. So mixed income developments, if you can get the scale that you need, it's an easier pill to swallow as a developer if I'm doing, if I've got that market rate offset. And typically when we think of high income renters, that offset is manageable for them. So if you tell me, the town of Silverton tells me that I have to include affordable units in a development, I will probably charge the market rate renter more than I would have otherwise, rather than take it out of my profit, because I still need to attract an investor. But that for them, if they're making a lot of money, really isn't that much of an ask. So there's that cross subsidy has to happen somewhere. It's an easier sell and more natural, I think, from a socioeconomic perspective, to have mixed income developments. It's much harder to achieve that ideal in a community of your size. Unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, the low-income housing tax credit is the biggest generator of affordable units in America. Those units are also heavily concentrated in low-income areas, and it's the reality that we have chosen to create in how we have managed housing policy in the country.
Yeah, I hear that. I think in Silverton, because it's so small and because we do have smaller units, and we have an opportunity to maybe do it a little bit differently, and I'd like to look at doing it differently. And I also hear and feel the need for units on the ground, unlocking the door and moving in as being the highest priority, but just not, I don't know, if we can kind of keep sight of the community, I think that's important too. And I also think that we have a pretty healthy fear of developers, and the word developer and investor is a pretty hot button, sensitive, I don't know, that there's a lot of just discomfort there. And I'm wondering, how do we work with these topics and these subjects in our community that are of so high stakes that could really benefit people who live in Silverton, and not get in our own way when we talk about the word developer and investor. It's really, I think, scaring us, and I'd like us to understand what that means and leverage it for the benefit of the people who live and want to live in Silverton.
I didn't see Chris hand this up first.
I was just going to say a quick response to that. I mean, Colorado is fortunate in that we do have a lot of really good developers, and developers whose heart is in the right place, and sometimes it's just a matter of attracting them and finding them, and forging partnerships with them. And we also have, particularly in your region too, some very strong nonprofit developers who would be good partners.
I didn't see Molly.
We're also an opportunity zone, and that had come up when we were starting to figure out how to create that designation and to create a working packet around it. Have you seen any increase in any of the areas that are opportunity zones with affordable housing?
That's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. That is not something that we have studied, and so I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Jordan?
Yes, I guess this is a question for Beth or Heidi. Would it be possible for us to get more detailed income data? I feel like there's kind of the two problems of like, we have the segment of the community that's not making enough to afford to stay here. And then we have housing that's too much and we want to close that gap ideally. And I feel like we have a lot of information on the housing side of that. Because it seems from your presentation that we're mainly losing people in the service industry. And just having more detailed data, maybe we're missing a group of people, or we can come up with more targeted solutions. Or maybe we recognize a problem of like, oh, maybe our service industry workers aren't actually getting paid as much as neighboring communities in comparison. Maybe some of the problem means our service workers need to get paid more, and we need to be able to bring the cost of housing down. So I think those two things, are connected in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so in an ideal world, and the best way to do that is do a survey, a resident survey. So you are, getting all of that information directly from workers and directly from residents. That was not built into our scope. I'd be happy to talk to Beth about how to, do that and what that might mean, because it sounds like you've got some staff capacity. In terms of the wages, so, in part, just kind of like a caution, because you're so small, one of the wrinkles that we've run into is it's not just Silverton. There's many communities within the region that your margin of error is so big that we're seeing, we see some trends, but sometimes they just don't make sense to us. And so we do have some employment data on how the jobs that workers in Silverton occupy, how that has changed. But there are big swings, and the numbers are just a little bit, there's a high margin of error in those numbers. I'll go ahead and include that data, in the report with caveats. But if you really wanted to understand sort of that experience of the worker, the person, that requires a resident survey. Those aren't hard to do online, and it's it's easy to analyze. It's just more of the design, making sure that you're answering the proper question or asking the proper questions. And I'd be happy to work with Beth or Gloria on, if your staff wanted to go ahead and do that, I'd be happy to be, an advisor or offer some input around that.
Do you have any questions? Well, we are deeply immersed in these issues, and every piece of information takes us a step closer to coming up with solutions that'll work for this community. So thank you very, very much. This is all very helpful.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And we'll be finishing this up in the next few weeks and provide a draft report then.
Awesome. Thank you. And
thank you.
And Beth, before you jump off, can you just tell us briefly what the August 5th Housing Summit is and who's invited or how you can RSVP, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Housing Summit on August 5th is bringing together the key stakeholders of different experts in housing that are regional and also agencies with the Colorado. So we have representation from the Department of Housing, CHAFA, Housing Solutions, Root Policy, from the town and the county administrators, some local regional contractors and builders that have shown interest in development for workforce housing, as well as lending institutions that are within Silverton. So we have a group of all of us will be meeting on the afternoon of 5th and kind of going through the details of what Silverton has right now. Obviously, we'll be using some of this information from Heidi and seeing what different programs we can start putting in place and brainstorming ideas that will bring actions in terms of funding or grant request or even program development.
Can you be more specific on the exact time and the exact location? If it's all via Zoom, if it's partially in person, where is it being held?
Absolutely. So it is from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. on August 5th in Town Hall, in the same room that you're at. And then we will have a Zoom for those that need to attend virtually.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
That's something that can be noticed so that multiple of us can show up to that if we'd like.
Yeah, we can notice that.
Great. Well, Heidi, Beth, thank you very, very much. I think unless there's any further discussion or questions, we'll move on to our next agenda item. All right. New business 4A, consideration to rescind the stage 1 fire ban.
Yes, so the county commissioners have rescinded their fire ban, and Jim Donovan has suggested that the town follow suit.
Okay, then I move to rescind ordinance 2021-6, an emergency ordinance establishing a stage 1 municipal fire ban.
Second.
Go. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Burley,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Beerma,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. All right, 4B, consideration to approve Eat a Bite food truck request for modification to hours of operation.
All right, so you will find a memo in your packet on Eat a Bite food truck requesting additional hours just on Tuesdays, and I will let Director Bove answer any questions regarding this topic.
And the specific request is to extend the hours until 3 p.m. on Tuesdays. Do I hear a motion to make a decision on this item?
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to extend the Silverton Farmers Market event permit modification to include the Eat a Bite food truck until 3 p.m.
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Burley,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Beerma,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. All right. New business 4C, consideration to reissue the Columbine Park RFP.
And we did only receive one RFP for this, and we are asking to reissue that RFP to hopefully find someone local and a little less expensive.
Are we planning to make any changes to the RFP or changes in how we're distributing the RFP to get a better result this time?
Well, we did distribute it in the height of summer, so like during July. So we're hoping that if we do it again, maybe we'll get some more people to come in. But no, we're not making any changes to the actual RFP. Is that correct?
The only
Director
significant
Bo.
change is we're gonna leave it open for significantly longer.
Yeah.
2 weeks was a bit of a rush timeframe to get such a project of scale together, so we're gonna leave it open for a little over a month, hoping that we give some responding firms more time to prepare.
So other than the town website, where else is it being advertised?
The town website, the newspaper, believe it was released on social media also. Kelly, do you have any additional?
I have nothing to do with it.
Is it typical for us to advertise in other regional newspapers for something like this?
Certainly that would be appropriate.
Without
So
overdoing it on budget?
Montrose, Grand Junction, Durango,
Yeah.
Farmington, a little bit closer to home.
Certainly. I think for a project of this scale, it warrants doing our due diligence.
Oh, Cortez. Yeah.
We could broaden the reach, but traditionally, I think it was released, or typically released just social media, newspaper, website. And I believe somehow it made it onto a engineering and architecture site. There's kind of these sites out of Denver that group all of those available bids and RFPs together. Because we did have a response from, and some inquiries from some websites that was distributed on.
Great.
Okay, so there technically would be a small budget impact if we decided to push those to more newspapers and everything else, or a little bit more online presence in those newspapers to other communities around the region. So what do we think the actual budget impact would be? 300, 500, Nate, guess?
It depends on the length of the run as well as which newspaper we do go through. Whenever we did the administrator search, that did cost quite a bit more than just a couple hundred.
Okay.
Do you think you would like more direction from us in terms of how much to spend, or do you feel like you have sufficient discretion to come up with that amount?
I feel like we have sufficient discretion. Keeping it under 500 would be my goal, at much under 500.
It seems like if we spend a little bit of money to advertise, we end up with a good response that's thousands of dollars less than the first one. We kind of net out ahead anyway.
I'm confident if the window is longer, we'll see an increase in responses and applications, or I'm sorry, proposals. I'm aware of at least 2 local firms that are interested in bidding the project, but could get to it.
So do we have a motion to approve the reissuing of the Columbine Park RFP with the extended deadline for response, as well as a small budget for advertising?
So moved.
Second it.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Grella,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wiggert,
Yes.
trustee Birma,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Marty,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. Moving on to new business item 4D, resolution to reassign signatories to close out water plant project loan documents.
All right, to quote Director Sites, this resolution is the last technicality required to complete diligence on the water plant project. Staff recommends approval, and any questions?
And to be specific for people watching, it's
Yes.
approval to remove former Mayor Tukey, former town manager Feinberg, former town clerk Michelle Hamilton, and to add myself and Director John Seitz to the signatories.
Okay, we don't have a final number on this resolution. Is there a reason?
It will be 05. That one was not published with the final number, but it will be 2021-05.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to pass resolution number 2021-05, a resolution of the town of Silverton designating representatives authorized to coordinate the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment and the Colorado Water Resource and Power Development Authority regarding the financial matters, assistance matters.
Second.
Before roll call, I just had one quick question. Since we're adding me as a signatory, does there need to be an alternate signer of this resolution, or can I sign it? Can we just confirm before we do this and then replace my signature with Sally's if I can't be signing something authorizing myself as a signatory?
Yes, I will make sure that.
Okay,
Included in the motion?
thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Grella,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wiggert,
Yes.
trustee Birma,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Marty,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
One more question. Do I need to recuse since this really sad me as a signatory? There's no financial benefit, so I don't think I do.
I don't think you do.
So then yes. All right, moving on to item New business 4E, consideration to approve the communications plan and support RFP.
So this communications RFP is for both plan and support for our communications and events manager and department. To be clear, this is a community-focused communications plan. So not like a marketing plan like we would see. It's more on how we're communicating with our community and making sure that they're getting the information that they need, as well as some specific deliverables, including mission statement, vision, town motto, brand anchors, and a detailed year plan with a 3-year overview.
Okay, research and develop a mission, vision and a mission statement and a town motto. Working with community builders. That was actually something that we used to do. Jess can back me up on this. When we would go to our board retreats, we'd actually come up with our vision as a collective board. I believe a lot of that documentation already exists from the last time we went. Jess, that was a couple of years ago. And are you saying it's actually going to be different than the focus of the board itself? Trying to find out what the community thinks versus what the board thinks?
I would hope they would be aligned.
Okay.
And my goal here was to hopefully wrap up this RFP in time for our retreat and have this person be able to be at the retreat as well, so that they can gather information that way and kind of facilitate a discussion as well around the vision and the mission, so that we can get that from the community as far as what has been done already, and then what you guys come up with.
Okay, so my next question in that is, it's a good strategy to include the entire community, but if it's going to strictly be something that's done on a social media platform, we're not encompassing the whole community. So what was the strategy going to be to actually communicate with the town?
And that would be laid out in the proposals that we get from them. So if they said it was just social media, we could look at that and consider that. If they said they were going to do something larger scale, like door to door, whatever they plan on in the proposal, it's kind of open in that respect.
Okay, well, because there's just a lot of our aging community that don't use any of those social media platforms or anything. So
right,
you can't forget that demographic.
Absolutely. And I think that actually is why we need a communications plan, so that we don't just rely on one avenue of communication, so we can open it up and figure out who we're missing in the community as a town and how we can get them engaged.
Yes, we need the town crier at the post office. Okay, so is that an additional budget impact, or wait, it's restructure, allocate? Is it already built into the budget?
Yes.
Okay, then the consideration is just to support the RFP more or less than anything.
Yes.
How confident are you that the allocated budget amount can cover all 6 of these action items?
Very confident.
Okay.
I've talked to a couple of possible people that might be interested in sending in a proposal, and was trying to get an idea of how much to ask for, and that's where I landed.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion to, I don't actually see it in here, to distribute the communication plan and support RFP for, come on, this isn't, probably need that a little bit better laid out. What do we want to call this actually?
Communications plan and support RFP.
Okay. All right, so I'll make a motion to approve the communications plan and support RFP.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Barella,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Birma,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. All right, moving on to our final new business item for F, request for letter of support for San Juan County Historical Society for the restoration of the Silverton Northern Engine House rehabilitation.
And the town was asked to submit a letter of support for this, for the final phase of restoring the engine house.
Any questions, or do I hear a motion to approve the letter of support?
I don't want to because my father is named on this. So if somebody else would like to make a motion, please.
I can make a motion to approve the letter of support for the, engine, for the San Juan County Historical Society engine project.
I'll second. Roll call, please.
Trustee Barella,
Recuse.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Birma,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. All right, consent agenda. Molly?
My name is spelled wrong in every single one of the minutes. And then my next question was Ricky Wrinkle, a $2,071.70 refund check.
That was from 2019 when we certified him for not paying his water utility bill due to that we found out afterwards his water meter was broken.
Okay, thank you. You had one. Oh, we were signing checks, sorry, and Jim had one. Do you remember what it was?
I don't.
It was the very large check. Oh, come on. 29,000.
For AJ Construction.
AJ Construction.
That was for road base.
Okay, distributed everywhere.
Between three different funds. Streets, sewer, and water.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for always having those readily available too.
So do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda with the revision to Molly's name throughout the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Barella,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Birma,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. All right, moving on to staff reports.
I am here to answer any questions on the staff report. Yes.
Just one, the letter that we received in our packet. Are we signing that tonight?
We do have it available.
San Miguel Power. So we can
Yes.
Get that done. And then the back page too for Kemet. Okay.
Do any staff have any questions, requests, or highlights that they'd like to speak about before we move on?
Not at this time.
Okay.
I'm gonna highlight some stuff later on.
I'd like to thank Todd for getting that grant done and closed out for the outdoor dining and the additional barricades. I'm glad that went through. And anticipated award, we've got our fingers crossed. I mean, it's July. Do we know that grant award from the CDOT yet?
The original timeline was reviews in June and awards in July. Now it just says.
Just waiting for July to end? Okay,
So
all right.
I'm hoping in the next couple of days, but I think summer 2021 implies to me by the end of August.
Okay, thank you, John.
Within the next 30 days at most. I'm checking first thing every morning.
All right, my next question for you is the tree health. So in, oh goodness, what year was that? 2019? We made the decision to try to go with the company to do the spraying up at Kendall to help mediate the beetle kill. What has been the outcome of that?
That is a difficult outcome to quantify. It's just eyeballing it. You can't really, we did take some before pictures which you could reference. But I think that's a really difficult thing to quantify, whether or not the trees are healthier than they were 2 years ago. We did get another proposal from Miller to treat those trees again. I'm inclined, certainly discuss this more internally before we bring it to the board. I'm inclined to do a tree health study before we recommend any treatment options to get a consensus of what the tree health really looks like up there. So rather than jumping in to a treatment method, I'd like to maybe take some time to do an assessment. There are immediate things we can do. We're seeing rapid erosion up there. We're definitely seeing kind of this two-pronged attack where we have root disease and beetle kill kind of attacking the trees from the top and bottom. It is a safety hazard. It is a liability concern. Could affect anything from trees falling in unexpected areas or expected areas onto campsites, which poses a certainly a liability risk, but also we'd like to continue having wildfires up there for generations to come. I think we need to find a way to address this issue. I think it is going to require a longer term solution as opposed to incremental small steps. I think we need a overarching plan for how we're going to deal with that land up there and keep it healthy. But we're already seeing quite a bit of beetle kill and root disease up there.
So a few years ago as well, when we were talking about doing that mitigation up in the trees, and I believe we had, I don't know, Firewise here for a time frame. There was a gentleman who came who did a presentation from CSU in the basement of the Grand Imperial, and it was strictly about beetle kill. Do we have any information? Because if that was released, people, you'd be quite shocked to find out that this is supposed to happen. It's the natural cycle. Our forest health he was talking about being too dense or too close together. So he had a lot of amazing solutions that were presented at that night. I cannot remember his name for the life of me, but he was a environmental tree science guy. I mean, he brought us little boxes of beetles and to see exactly the size and parameter of what's going on. And he also had some historical photos of what this looked like, because it is supposed to burn too.
Sure.
And yeah.
Natural cycle of the forest. I think one of the most obvious things that we're dealing with is the erosion of the dirt up there, especially when we have rains like this. A lot of the roots are exposed and there's really shallow bedrock up there is my understanding. So in some places we have these 30 or 40 trees that really only are anchored by, let's say 2 feet of dirt or less in some places. So we're seeing a lot of root exposure. We're seeing a lot of trees shifting. Brian Fulmer has done a lot of volunteer clearing up there of the fall, kind of just because it's a passion of his. But I think we need a more sustainable solution up there than relying on Brian to just do good work as he sees fit.
All right, thank you for that update.
We're planning on bringing you a more comprehensive assessment and
You just had it in your thing. I just had to go there.
All right, if there's nothing else on staff reports, we'll move on to committee reports. We had any, I guess we had a planning commission meeting.
You don't want to talk about this one, Jim? Well, you're the senior ranking member, sir. Gotta take care some days. We had a application for a proposal to put 2 antique Airstreams behind what's going to be the Animus Inn. Planning Commission didn't really know how to proceed because it seems as though it may be a code variance, so we asked for our planning director to come back with a little bit more information so that we can determine whether or not we should be making this decision or whether it should go to the Board of Adjustments. Whether or not to allow these. They're gonna be basically a suite is what they're called for nightly rentals, people to stay in. But waiting to hear back on that. And then we also had an in-depth discussion about the proposal at Miners Flats over by Kendall Mountain, kind of 8-unit multiplex and some of the pros and cons of the design. Anything like that? That was good. We had a good community input on both projects. Using some of the existing information, for example, the caboose at the Wyman on that particular issue, and then also getting some good feedback from the neighbors over on the Miners Flat 8-plex, the proposed 8-plex. And this is the second time off the top of my head that this was submitted. It was submitted once back in 2008, and they're submitting it again to move forward. And there were some issues that were brought up that will be reviewed and looked at, and then we'll discuss at our next meeting.
I have a question to that, the Miners Flats development. It seems like it's moving in the right direction with somebody doing a market rate unit, and it would temporarily solve part of the problem. What were the major design issues? Or was it too big? Was it too small? Was there not enough? You know, I mean, those were all the minutia that we were just asking the housing lady.
There's quite a few complications within the code as to how it's actually designed.
Okay.
For ones, in R2, you're allowed to have, you could have potentially 2 4-plexes not touching, but this is proposed as a
single unit
combined on 4 lots. So trying to design a structure that maximizes the available area while reducing all the complications that we have here with our winters and weather.
Easement setbacks, everything, snowfall.
Snow removal was one of them.
Removal, okay.
Alley access.
And
because the proposed structure has 6 garages accessing from 6 garages accessing from the alley.
From the alley, okay.
There's probably about 20 different things that the planning director was hoping to list as conditions for approval. And so we're just trying to tick some of those off so we can go forward.
But in the overall scope of everything, is there anything that she's going to possibly bring us? Because I mean, this is exactly the project that we were just presented as a hypothetical. So what are we as a board? I mean, is there something we can do to change the code or to help something? Or is it really poor designing and it's not necessarily about the code?
I think it's a little bit of both, really.
Okay.
It's a design, it seems to be a design that doesn't really come from somebody who understands what we actually deal with here in town with our roads, streets,
Snow removal, yeah.
Okay.
And of course, it will come to the board after it goes back to the planning commission, and we just have a more clear direction on how this is actually gonna work out, because they're wanting input from the planning commission, but that's not the job.
Yeah, yeah, they're supposed to be.
They need to come with a set design that we can then evaluate.
Okay, thank you, Jess. Thank you, Jim.
Was there any discussion about requiring some of those units to be either workforce or resident restricted or anything like that? Similar to some of the suggestions that were in the proposal.
When this was originally accepted in 2008, there was a clause in there that said that 4 of them had to be deed restricted, low income. So yeah, that's certainly on the table. And looking for a guarantee there, though, but with investors looking to maximize the return on investment, it's a tough sell.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to find out what types of things can be done that don't scare people away. Thank you. Are you aware of any other committee meetings since the last?
No, I'm not. And that brings me to my next topic of setting a work session for boards and committees. And in this work session, I'd like to confirm roles, review descriptions of boards and committees. There's some discrepancies in the Muni code. As I'm going through everything, I just kind of want to tighten it up. And then also maybe set some regular dates that we would meet for certain committees that I know that I'm sure this schedule has been before, but I ask that you humor me and try and help me organize again.
Do you have proposed dates?
I do have a couple proposed dates. One of them is this Thursday at 7 o'clock, if anyone's available. No, okay. That's okay. It was a long shot. Then I'm looking at the 5th of August. Nope.
No, especially since there's that housing workshop as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I was thinking later on that night, but the 10th, Tuesday, the 10th? No, okay. Oh, that's right. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It just that whole week up between.
Right.
Out of town.
All right, looking at the 17th or the 16th?
There's a planning commission meeting on the 17th.
16th?
Works for me.
16th looks good to me.
Okay.
Cool.
Awesome. Does 7 o'clock work? Okay.
That is 7 PM, correct?
I hope so. I don't want to wake up that early.
Just clarifying.
And then a date for the finance committee, but trustee George is not here today. And I know he's on that committee. And then we can set the date for the personnel and ordinance committee after our committee review, because I think we'll have some stuff to bring back to them from our work session. Does that work for everyone? Cool. Just thinking that through. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I like finance committee meetings early. I think we used to do them at what time? About 9. We'd meet in the administrator's office. Yeah. And it was typically close to the time that the sales tax generation comes out. So that way we can do some forecasting and some looking and things like that. So what time frame? You usually get that on the 17th, right, from the previous month or from the previous 2 months ago?
Generally, yes.
Yeah. So anytime typically after the 17th, 9 a.m. I think Tyler's, was it Monday? I can't remember now, because I know he's on call. What?
3 of us attended?
Yeah, you can't do Wednesday or
Thursday. So it was either Monday, Tuesday, early 8, yeah, like 9 a.m. in administrator's office. And it was after the sales taxes.
Okay.
So that's usually the best times to start coordinating that.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, moving on to trustee reports. I think we'll all just head down doing work.
Sorry.
And then moving on to continued business, affordable housing, update on water sewer financing option trial program.
All right, so the memo in your packet on the water and sewer financing trial program that we proposed is currently on hold. We are looking into an outside entity that could take on the financing program. We could technically do the financing with private citizens for a shorter amount of time, like 10 to 15 years, but our attorney recommended that we look out for other opportunities there to have them finance it. So we'll be looking at options in our housing summit, and I'm also looking at a multi-jurisdictional housing authority that will be proposed here in a couple, hopefully weeks, but we'll see how long I can get that proposal together for you all. But it is an option, and there's a lot of other stuff that you can do with a housing authority that you can't do as a local government. So that might be an option, as well as the capacity. So we're kind of looking into that realm. This was a good prompt to kind of go down that route a little bit further. That's my update on that.
Great. All right, moving on to continued business 9B1, OHV's special election date setting.
So I've included the memo on special elections that you had in your last packet, as well as the draft ballot language. And I will defer to Martha and Kelly for direction going forward.
So the recommendation, it seems like from the memo, is to set the date for Tuesday, October 12th, 2021. Is there any additional direction or guidance that we should receive before making that decision? Marty?
We calculated the various potential dates. Basically, October 12th is the latest Tuesday. Election needs to be on a Tuesday. So we sort of took the furthest out date that you could do with the potential of being able to include other items on the ballot. So both petitions.
I think the only question I have at this moment is, to what extent is it the town's responsibility to kind of create education around how this ballot works in terms of result? So that voters understand what their vote means, since there's two conflicting ballot items.
The town certainly can provide education so long as it is neutral.
And would now be, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So are you actually proposing that the town of Silverton create a packet like what happens when the state has elections and they send out the booklet to every voting member of the state of Colorado?
I don't know if I'm proposing that or not. I was just wondering if that's something that's traditionally the obligation of the town or not.
I don't think in my lifetime of voting here, I've ever seen anything like that. Only the ones that are issued by the state on large ballot measures. Everything else has been, I mean, the wording on this, a yes vote would allow operations, a no vote would leave status quo. A yes vote would prohibit operations, a no vote would leave status quo. The wording is, I don't know, as simple as I can see possible, having a dual ballot. Yeah.
So I agree that independently, each ballot initiative is clear in terms of what a yes or no vote means. But perhaps now would be an okay time, Marty, for you to kind of describe to us, or we could put this on the next meeting agenda, what happens when the results conflict. For example, what if the first initiative is a no vote and the second initiative is a yes vote, or vice versa? Or if they're both yes votes, so we have both open the town and close the town, be the prevailing of the two. What happens then in terms of which wins in the end?
Interesting question. I would need to do a little bit more research. I think the one with in that event, the one with the largest number of votes prevails. If they're equal, frankly, I'm not certain.
And is there the same result if the yes in one wins and the no in the other wins? Is that still based on whichever has the total most votes, or does a change in law supersede a status quo?
Again, I would need to do some research on that.
And yeah, and that was why I was asking the initial question. So I agree that each one independently is pretty clear, but together, like if someone wants to open the whole town, what's the best way to vote? If they want to close the town, or if they want the route, is there, like, how do they know that their vote is going towards their intent?
As with all ballots, someone can vote on one and not the other.
Okay, so it sounds like in general, towns don't provide that type of guidance. So that's a good thing for us all to know. And it sounds like we may get some further guidance from you, Marty, about what the different potential outcomes might be, just so that we all understand before the vote.
Sure, happy to do that.
Cool.
Just had one other question about that. Since two of the options are the status quo, do those get added together, or are they counted separately and compared to the option above it or below it?
I will try and do some research on that as well. I don't think that they would get added.
Oh, cool. Well, the good thing is there's a little bit of time between now and October 12th. So we'll be able to answer all those questions.
Right. And we'll also double check to make sure that the wording, is appropriate. Tonight's meeting was not necessarily to approve the language of the ballot, but simply to set the date. So these are the draft ballot questions based upon the language of the petitions. But we'll do some additional research and probably run it by the municipal league just to see if they have any other experience or suggestions.
So I'd like to make a motion to set the date for both petitions to be Tuesday, October 12th, 2021.
I'll second. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Varela?
Yes.
Trustee Harper?
Yes.
Trustee Wager?
Yes.
Trustee Bearman?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Marty?
Yes.
Mayor Foreman?
Yes. All right. Now we move on to our second public comment period. Again, we'll offer public comment to those who are in person first. Please introduce yourself and then limit your comments to 3 minutes. And then following in person, we'll move to our virtual participants.
Well, thank you.
I'm Ken Whitens. My wife Sherry is with me. We've been coming up to Silverton for 35 or 40 years for now, it seems we're extended periods of time. We'll be here for 6 weeks and we love your community. But I did have a question about the power line issue. There's been a deal posted on Facebook with the schedule, and it says roads closed from like 8 to 12 and open from 12 to 1 and then closed again. But is it open at night or before 8 a.m. and after 4 p.m.? Because some of us, we have 9 or 10 other couples coming up with Jeeps for a week, starting coincidentally the 9th. And there'd be an instance possibly of wanting to go up to the Red Mountain Pass area and do a Jeep trail and come back later in the day by another route. And if we could go up there early and come back later and the road's open, that would take that problem out of our equation. So I don't know whether you guys have that information or not.
So we typically don't do a Q&A. I don't think anyone's going to object to us answering this question right now. But before 8:30 and after 5:30 p.m., the road's intended to be open.
Okay. So if we get up there early and because it would be really bad if we went over Bullen Pass and came back over Ophir and got there at 6 to the 5:50 and found that it was closed. That's a fur piece to go back around. So thank you.
So, yeah, I was going to say what they've done before when we've had to have road construction, when they had to redo the Ruby walls and anything of that nature. It was that short time frame during lunch to get everybody through, reopening in the afternoon, open prior. They did have a stoplight because it was CDOT mitigation work. So I don't believe that isn't even an option on the table right now to have that two-way light, because it's not like road construction like previous years. But this is not the first time, and it probably won't be our last, but it was just the timing.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you.
Didn't know about it, neither did
I can let everybody know and let a couple other groups know then too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Gary.
Again, it's real hard to keep quiet the whole meeting when the thing I wanted to talk to you about was one of the first things, the road closure and the power issue. When the world got shut down a year and a half ago, and there were Zoom meetings and the chamber was very active in what was going on, one of these women, you guys, I wrote her name down, but I don't know her, wasn't Region 9, but she was with somebody that was associated with that. She said, as far as she was concerned, in this part of the country, Silverton has disaster fatigue. But in the same breath, she said, because of that, we have our shit together. Rock slide, avalanche, road closures, mail truck has to go all the way around Lizard Head Pass. Those are disasters, and we worked our way through that very well because we're used to that. So this San Miguel Power wanting to disrupt a little bit of traffic on the highway, big deal. Let them do it. I want the lights to be on in the middle of winter.
Definitely.
That's all I got to say. Thanks.
Thank you. And I will note that at the last meeting, we updated our protocols. If you would like to comment on something mid-agenda, you just have to request it ahead of time, and we can have public comment on specific items mid-agenda.
Well, I didn't know what I wanted to talk about during the middle of the meeting, so I just sat quietly and let you guys do the job you're here for.
When I think we'd suggested a sign-up sheet that would be on the podium, that if you actually had an item that you wanted.
Yeah, there is that, but I didn't know I wanted to talk until later. Now, keep up the good work. Do the best you can for me and my community.
How was our volume? Is everybody speaking a little louder? Is everybody speaking a little louder?
A little bit. You need to up your volume a little bit.
Work on it. I'm working on it.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
All right, moving to our virtual public comment. Please introduce yourself. You have 3 minutes. And for those who didn't hear before, if you're on Zoom, click the raise hand button and we'll put you in the queue to speak.
Melody, you have the floor.
Am I on?
Yes.
Yep. Very good. I think that we're working in the right direction, working towards affordable housing. And I applaud everything that you do on that. But I do want to say that Silverton is very much a revolving door community. And for those of you who have lived here at any length of time, you see that come and go. Sometimes we have a lot of young people come with families, and sometimes we don't. And like, there's probably a couple hundred people in town right now that I don't know. 5 years, a lot of those people will have left, and there'll be another couple hundred people I don't know. So when you're planning your housing, I think you just need to plan for housing, not for a specific group that you think is going to come here someday and stay. People move to Silverton for a lot of reasons, and they leave Silverton for a lot of reasons. It's unique, it's beautiful, and then sometimes it becomes a burden for people when they've been here a while. So I just wanted to make that suggestion. It's a revolving door community. Thank you.
Thank you, Melody.
Thank you, Melody.
It doesn't look like we have any more public comment this evening, so we will close public comment. The time is now 9:21 p.m. and I adjourn the meeting. Thank you all very much.
So growing up, we used to say at school, you had to wait 1 year before they could become your best friend.